And we'll be in the 14th book of Yisrayl, part 2, Never Sin Again, chapter 10. And we're going to be covering here in the sermon entitled, We Are in the Time of Gathering, and the greatest part of the tribulation, and a great depopulation will come. So this is where we are. This is right after the Feast of Tabernacles and the last great day in 2014. And we're going to be starting off here, and it's amazing how Pastor, you look back at these sermons and you look back at what Pastor covered just last week. And he was talking about, remember, the news articles concerning Putin and some of the things that the President Putin at that time was saying. Well, you look at what we're covering tonight, and Pastor, again, he shows, I don't know if you could understand that speech by President Putin that you just watched. So there were some things there that were being talked about, and that were being, that Putin was saying. And if I remember right, basically what Putin said is that we need laws that we can all live with, and we need to follow those laws. Was basically what he was saying. But it's amazing that, back in 2014, that this is what was being spoken of, and then it's continually being reiterated and continually spoken. It's just amazing how these things come together. But Pastor, he shows us here, in this greatest part of the tribulation. And remember the warning that we were given. We were given the warning that that in these last days that this tribulation would be like nothing anyone has ever seen before. It's going to be worse, and there's going to be no time was ever like it, and there will never be a time of tribulation like we're going to be experiencing here in a very, very short time period. And Pastor he even brought that out. And remember, he talked about being questioned, and I'm going to get to that a little bit later. But he said that he said that we are going to be questioned again, that the time is going to come when we're going to be asked, are we of the house of Yahweh? Are we with the house of Yahweh? And I want you to remember Pastor's words, because many years ago, Pastor, remember, he brought up the teaching, he brought up a warning. And remember the warning that he gave? He says, what are you going to do when they come and arrest me? Remember those words? Praise Yahweh. He taught that over and over and over again. What are you going to do when they come and arrest me? Those words came to pass many years after he uttered those words, but he knew that was going to come to pass. So again, he's warning us and saying, what are you going to do when you are asked? Are you going to stand up, or are you going to deny me? Because if you deny me, or if you deny the house of Yahweh, you deny Yahshua, then we are going to be denied when our sentencing comes. So, don't take these things lightly. And when we have a tendency, I think, at times to do that, we become complacent. We become complacent with where we are. We become comfortable with where we are. And when we become complacent with something, we have a tendency to let our guard down. And that's where you're going to get hurt. That's where Satan comes in, and that's where somebody comes in from a different way and gets in, and they create a situation that generates problems. When I was with the police department many years ago, that was one of the things that they taught us. Don't ever become complacent, because that's how people get hurt. And it's the same way in the workplace. It doesn't matter if you're working construction, if you're working in a butcher shop somewhere, if you're working in carpentry, it doesn't matter where you are. If you're working in a warehouse, if you get complacent and you're in a dangerous environment, then that complacency is going to cost you. You're going to get hurt eventually. But Pastor, he shows here, he talks about this time. He says, we're getting ready to go into the most trying time the world has ever had, but also a selection is going to be made at that time, as we see in Scripture. And that's talking about, of course, the selection and the qualification for those who want to, for those who will choose to be made in the image and likeness of Yahweh. All we have to do is allow ourselves to be made into the image and likeness of Yahweh. It's simply by simply submitting ourselves to these laws. Or as Pastor shows here, he says, the thing for you to do, well, what he says here, he says, if you lose it now, brethren, the second death, that's your second death. There won't be another one. You won't have another chance. He says, the things for you to do is humbly submit yourself. Unity is what's going to get you through this. Unity. Unity. And that word unity, see if this is going to cooperate with me. Yeah, there we go. Wow, it was already set. The word unity means the quality or state of not being multiple. In other words, not this person doing one thing, this person doing another, this person with different agendas or different goals, but it's the quality or state of not being multiple, of oneness, as a condition of harmony to become in accord, of like mind. Continuity without deviation or change, as in purpose or action. The quality or state of being made one. And this is what the laws of Yahweh do. The laws of Yahweh bring us together. They unite us all in one purpose, and that purpose is to bring harm to no one, not ourselves, not the environment, not anyone else. This is what the laws of Yahweh do. The mess that you see out in the world, you see how it's escalating. You just see how it escalated last night in Dallas. Very close to home, how these things are beginning to escalate. This is a division that you see beginning to take place. It's becoming more evident. But you see here it says, unity is what's going to get you through this. It's not going to be somebody else's. It's going to be yours. If you know through the scriptures, the 6,000 years of man's trials and tests, the proving that mankind's way, the way of his choosing, is what is bringing on all the sickness, disease, and war. But this unity, this unity being of one, being of like-minded. The prophet Yekeskia talked about that, and he talks about it in Yekeskia 18. How he says, where he says that all souls are mine. The soul that sins, it will die. But if a man is just by doing that which is lawful and right, in other words, coming to unity, coming together. He says, and if he has walked in my statutes and has kept my judgments to do them, he is just and he will surely live, says Father Yahweh. Well, it's these laws of unity, these laws of Yahweh. This is what brings life. This is what prevents sickness, disease, war, all of these things. Because mankind, in going their own way, has brought all of this along. And Pastor shows here, he says they would not follow Yahweh's prophet, and they had their own way and their own reasoning. Their own reasoning. Remember here in Romans chapter 1. In Romans chapter 1, remember there where it says in Romans 1:16, it says, "For I am not ashamed of the message, for it is the strength of Yahweh unto life everlasting for everyone who believes. For in this message is the righteousness of Yahweh revealed, that it is written that the just will live by the faith." And then you can see here where it talks about the judgment of Yahweh is revealed from heaven against all unholiness and unrighteousness. But take a look down here at verse 21 here. Verse 21 shows, because that when they knew Yahweh, they did not glorify him as their father, nor were they thankful, but they became idolatrous in their reasoning. They became idolatrous in their own reasoning. See? You see how this ties in here? In their own reasoning, doing what was right in their own eyes and pleasing in their own sight. In their own reasoning, and their senseless minds were darkened. And they professed themselves to be wise, just as the world professes themselves to have all this wisdom. But in professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, because they rejected the very laws that can bring about what they seek. And this is the same thing, men, that we have been brought into. We have been invited here by the Creator of the universe to be a part of this solution to this mess that's going on out in the world. But in their minds, they say, well, there's nothing wrong with what I'm doing. And Pastor shows her, he says, if you've got a position in the house of Yahweh, you really need to keep that position. We need to be tempted by the things that are in the world, or by the illusion, by the perception. the perception of what is out in the world. Hollywood offers all kinds of perceptions, and it's all fake. We've all seen. I mean, we've all seen the, how years and years and years ago, I can remember going on a tour of a Hollywood studio, going through the back lot, and going through the lot where they have all these things, all these houses and stuff built, and you see houses that were, that they show on, TV, and they look like beautiful mansions, and you pass in front of this thing on the street, and you make a turn, and all you see is nothing. It's just a single front of the house with wood going back this way, and there's nothing behind it. It's empty. It's a facade. There's nothing behind it. This is what is out there in the world. The world doesn't have peace to offer. They don't have anything beneficial to offer. Can we go out? Is there anywhere in the world where you can go out and get and where you can actually receive health? Is there anywhere where you can go out there and receive receive the ability to have, or the possibility to have eternal life? No, you don't, because it doesn't exist out there. They don't have it to offer. Yahweh has it to offer. And we have been called here, to overcome. We've been called here to overcome the ways of the world. And there was a priest that gave me this particular saying here, and I think we can all kind of benefit from that there. But it says, Yahweh created you. Yahweh created you so that you can overcome. You can overcome whatever you want to. I don't care what it is. If you set your mind to it, you can do it. And that was from Pastor Yisrayl Hawkins back on January 21st, 1989. But this is why we were called. We were called to overcome the ways of this world. We were called to overcome this carnality, the carnal mind. Because the carnal mind is bitterly opposed. Remember, it's bitterly opposed to the laws of Yahweh. And we were created with that in order to test and prove that we want Yahweh's way over all else. And this is what Pastor covers here on this next page and a half, and he talks about somebody desiring to come to the house of Yahweh, but saying, I've got this bill to take care of, I've got this to take care of, I've got this car that takes, that I have to have, and you can read that how this person was paying, this exorbitant amount of money for a car, and everything that she was making. Everything that this person was making was going to pay that car. There was no benefit, really no benefit in that. We're actually working for nothing. And then he shows here, he says the car is going to be wore out before it gets paid for. It'll be worse. Then you'll have to buy another one to drive. Now that's the rat race that the world is in right now. And you can see it because anything that you buy out in the world, anything that you buy, that doesn't last. It just doesn't. It doesn't last. The lust for money, the greed for money. They don't benefit in things that things that are made to last. There's no money in that. You need to have replacements. You need to be able to replace something. So they build it with a certain lifespan in mind, and then usually right after the warranty wears out, it dies and goes out, and well, crud, it's out of warranty. Well, what do I have to do? Well, you just need to get another one. We've got the new and improved model. You shouldn't have that problem with that one. No, there's a whole nother problem that's down the road that you're probably going to have with it as soon as the warranty goes out. Okay, but that's the rat race. That's the rat race Pastor is talking about. And you've got, and there are people that, that seek to do that. And Pastor says here, he says, you won't even need your automobiles when you get into this position in Yahweh's kingdom that Yahweh has called us to. You think about the training and the education and everything that is coming forth from this house at no cost, as Pastor shows here. Everything can be provided for us. And the education is there. And you're not going to get this education out in the world, but the education that we receive here is the education in how do we apply the laws of Yahweh, because it's the laws of Yahweh that are going to stand forever. The laws of the land, the things out here in the world, they're not going to stand. That's what it says in 1 Yochanan chapter 2, and we'll get, Yahweh willing, we'll get to that here in a minute. Let's go ahead and go there now. But this is what he was talking about. He says you can throw it away. If you throw it away, that's your second death. You won't be qualified for another one, and you won't get another opportunity, another chance. This is the only opportunity that we have. And this is the admonition that was given here in 1 Yochanan. Chapter 2, verse 15, it says, "Do not love the world, nor the things that are in the world. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh," and that's what the world is filled with. It's lust. Not necessarily always lust after other people, but lust after things and possessions and positions and things like this. "For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life, it's not of the Father, but it's of the world." Notice where it comes from. It doesn't come from Yahweh. It says, "And the world passes away." But notice that the world passes away and the lust that is in it. But he who does the will of Yahweh, he who takes a hold and gets a hold of this knowledge that comes from this house, and applies it and overcomes, they are going to be the ones that abide forever, not those who go chasing after this other stuff. He says, "Little children, this is the last hour, and as you have heard, the anti-Messiah will come." Now there are even many anti-Messiahs, and by this we know that this is the last hour. Now remember, he says there's many anti-Messiahs, and that just means against the Messiah, or against the teachings of Yahshua, against the teachings of the Scripture, because that's what Yahshua taught. Yahshua taught what was in the Scripture. So that's anybody that goes against that is considered an anti-Messiah. Now I have not written to you because you do not know the truth, but because you know it, and that there is no lie in the truth. And who is a liar but he who denies that Yahshua is the Messiah? Remember the admonition and the warning that Pastor gave. He says we're going to be questioned. Do we belong to the house of Yahweh? Look at the repercussions of that if we deny that. Who is a liar but he who denies that Yahshua is the Messiah? He is the anti-Messiah who denies the Father and the Son. So in reality, that's what you're doing. When we deny the house of Yahweh, we say, "Oh, we don't have any part of that." What are we doing? We're denying. We're denying Yahweh. We're denying Yahshua. We're denying Pastor. We're not standing up for the truth. Pastor, he continues to show over here. He continues to show here. Let me see. About these diseases, the new moons. The new moons. He talks about the new moons pretty extensively here in the next page and a half. But the new moons, I think a lot of times, in times past, that maybe they weren't deemed as, by some they weren't deemed as important as, say, the Sabbath is. But if you take a look in Isaiah chapter 66, take a look at what's written there in Isaiah 66, what Isaiah says about the new moons. And he says, "And it will come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another." So you see the importance that is being put on the new moon. The new moon is actually being looked at as important of a feast or as a gathering time as the Sabbath. This is what he's saying here. It will come to pass that from one new moon to another and from one Sabbath to another, all flesh will come to worship before me, says Yahweh. So look at the importance that's being placed here. And Pastor shows here, when he was showing here these diseases that were coming about, he was talking about these films that were being shown and that are shown, the family films, and the knowledge that goes forth from those, and those are shown on the new moons. If we don't see them on the new moon, guess what? We miss that information. We wind up missing that information. And so, we don't know when or if we will ever actually have that information presented to us before, or presented to us again. So it's vital. He says, and those who don't want to appear, they have this great opportunity by doing so. This is needed information. And he shows here, the pastor was showing that the scientists, are showing these things coming to pass. Pastor foretold, and he told us what the scripture said about where these diseases are coming from. And now the scientists are proving it. The scientific studies are coming out that are backing up and actually proving exactly what Pastor said months and years ago as coming to pass, as absolutely true and correct. And he says here, if you don't make it to the new moons, remember what Yeshua said when he started hearing these excuses. Remember the excuses. Remember the parables? There's a couple of parables here. There's a parable of the Great Supper in, let me see here, in Luke chapter 14. In Luke chapter 14, verse 15, where it shows here, now when one of those who sat eating with him heard these things, and he said to him, blessed is he who will eat the bread in the kingdom of Yahweh. And then he said, a certain man gave a great supper and invited many. So you notice, not everybody was able to come to that supper. It wasn't open to everybody. Somebody walking by couldn't say, hey, there's a supper going on. I'm going to go join in. It says right there, it says they were invited. Many were invited. And he sent his servant at supper time to say to those who were invited, come, for all things are now ready. But they all with one accord, they began to make excuses. The first one said, I've bought a piece of land, and it's necessary that I go and see it. Please accept my apologies. Another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I must go try them out. Please excuse me. And another said, I've married a wife, so I cannot come. But you see the excuses for not going to where they were invited. Remember, we've been invited to this house for the purpose of qualifying and overcoming so that we can be a part, again, of this solution to this mess that we see out in the world. And then it goes down a little further, and then in verse 24 he says, for I say to you, none of those men who are invited will taste of my supper, because they refused. And this is the same thing that Pastor was telling us. If we don't take this seriously, if we don't take our calling at this time seriously, then we're going to blow it. We're going to lose it. We'll never be given another opportunity. Look at Matthew 22, the parable of the wedding feast, the same thing. The kingdom of Yahweh is compared to a certain king who gave a wedding feast for his son, and he sent out his servants to summon those who were invited to the wedding, but they didn't come. Then he sent out servants again, telling those who are called, behold, I have prepared my dinner, my oxen and my fatlings are killed, and all things are ready, come to the marriage. But notice verse 5, he says they didn't take it seriously. And they went their ways, one went to his farm, another to his business. Okay, and then it goes on further, and it talks about how they brutally killed the servant, the son when the son went out, or when the servant went out, and so when the king heard of this, of course, he said to the servants, the wedding is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy, and so they started calling others in. So replacements were called in. This plan of Yahweh is going to go forth with or without us. It doesn't matter. It's going to succeed. And if we don't stand in our place, then somebody else is going to replace us. We won't remain. We won't remain. Something's going to take place, and we're going to find some reason to leave. You see, we've seen it. That's the way it's been in the past. So, Pastor, he says, how does any excuse sound to Yeshua or Yahweh? Here is life. Here is life right here. It's death what you're practicing if you go the other way. Everything that's taught, that Pastor allows to be taught from this house, is beneficial for life. There's a benefit to it. We just have to grasp it. We have to be here. We have to take in that golden oil. And even though we might not understand what's being said, even though we might not grasp it, we need to be here so that we can at least take it in. And then when we qualify, when the mind is opened up, oh, okay, that's what all that meant. It doesn't say, Yahweh didn't say, keep my law if you understand it. Did he? Did he say, keep the Sabbath if you understand it? If you understand that you shouldn't eat pork, then don't eat it. But if you don't, it's okay. He never said that. He said, don't eat these things, don't touch these things, because they're harmful. It's the obedience that comes first, and then understanding. It's that obedience to the laws which leads to the unity which is going to get us through all of this mess that's coming down the road. When we salt, and he talks about he talks about salt, about salt being healthy. Well, the one thing the world wants to do away with your salt consumption. The doctors talk evil about salt. They say, it causes all kinds of diseases. Well, and it's not the salt that's causing the diseases. It's the lack of salt that's causing it. Remember what Pastor is saying here. Remember the studies that showed that a cell, if it has the proper amount of salt in it, cancer cannot attach itself to that. Nothing bad can invade that cell if it has the proper amount of salt in it. This sickness, it can't penetrate it. But here in verse 20 here, he says, and he's talking in Leviticus chapter 2, verse 12 and 13, it says, you may bring the first tithes of Yahweh, but they shall not be burned on the altar for a pleasing aroma. Every offering of your grain offerings, and you shall season with salt. You shall not allow the salt of the covenant of Yahweh to be lacking. So you see what salt represents? Salt represents that covenant with Yahweh. And what is a covenant? That covenant, it's a formal, solemn, binding agreement. This is what that salt represents. When we salt our sacrifices, it represents this covenant. It's a written agreement or promise, usually under a seal between two or more parties, especially for the performance of some action. Remember the basis of the covenant that Yahweh makes. He says, if you will diligently obey my voice by keeping my laws, statutes, commandments, and judgments, I will be your father, and you will be my people. You will be my children. That's the covenant. If we are obedient, he will be our father, and we will be his children. And this is what this is what it represents. When we salt, this is what it represents. And the benefit with that, and when we salt our sacrifices, it's a reminder of that. It should remind us of this covenant between Yahweh and us. And he said, and Pastor shows here, and the scriptures show that salt is healthy and salt is healthy. It's beneficial. Salt is necessary for the body to function properly. The body cannot function properly without salt. Salt is what regulates your blood pressure. One of the things that regulates your blood pressure. Without salt, if there's no salt in your body, you're going to die. Think about the salt of the covenant. If we don't have that salt of that covenant, if we don't keep that covenant, if we're not obedient, if we're not in unity with these laws and with Yahweh, then dying we will die. Because it's only through the keeping of these laws and only through this covenant, that we're going to have this protection. So that's all the time that I have right now. So if everyone will please stand. May Yahweh bless your understanding, and I'm going to turn the class over to the great Kahan, Nathaniel Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. One of the amazing things about Father Yahweh and his plan is that if we believe into the one whom Yahweh has sent, Yahweh's Spirit, which is fed and nourished through the keeping and the performing of Yahweh's laws, will lead and guide each and every one of us into all truth. And that truth is what is taught here at the pillar and the ground of the truth. I was, that last part that the great priest was mentioning concerning salt and the covenant. Okay? Who remembers what Pastor had brought out about French fries? When Pastor brought something out about French fries. Anybody? Okay, no, not quite. Although I'm sure they are using pork. You're not allowed. What was it? Okay, salt. Yes, you're getting closer. Comfort food. Someone said comfort food. Anyone else? I'm going to say the word, and then you guys are going to be like, oh, yeah. Anybody else? Okay, the word begins with a O. Okay, I'll just tell it to you. Oxytocin. Oh, yeah. Yes. Oxytocin. And remember, if you remember, he called it the love substance, or the substance of love, or I think he mentioned it as the chemical of love. But what he was saying was, when people feel depressed, he said, isn't it interesting how whenever somebody feels depressed, that they'll go get, a lot of the time people want to eat French fries. And he said it's because of the salt that's on the French fries that puts into the body the oxytocin. Okay, the body will create the oxytocin utilizing the salt. Okay? Now Yahweh called his covenant a covenant of salt. Okay? Now I want to read to you. Okay, let's see. This is a book called, and it's really the title, and please forgive me, I had, just so you get the title of the book, it says, Meet Your Happy Chemicals. Meet Your Happy Chemicals. Okay? Now, of course, we don't give honor to the God, to that particular God, so it's meet your joyous chemicals. And remember, this is that oxytocin. Okay, the oxytocin that's produced through the eating of salt, the salt that was on the French fries. Okay? But this is what is written up in this book concerning your joyous chemicals, or the chemicals that make you joyous. Okay? There's 4 of them. There's dopamine, there's oxytocin, there's serotonin, and there's endorphins. Okay, those are the 4 main ones, and all of those work in conjunction with adrenaline and all of these, your other hormones. But this is what they write up about this, and remember, Yahweh said, this is my covenant of salt. Okay, Yahweh is the greatest scientist, biologist. I mean, he already knows these things ahead of time, and here it is in the last days, 2015, 2016, where the scientists are finally writing about these particulars, which Pastor has already said many years ago. Okay? So here it says, for oxytocin, it's the feeling of trust. Oxytocin gives you a great feeling when you're with someone you trust. Okay? It's actually produced when you're in unity. Remember what Amosia says. Who can walk together lest they be in agreement? Okay? And this is a substance that's created in the body by 2 things. By salt and by trust. And so Yahweh has given us his covenant to trust on him. Okay? To believe in Yahweh. To trust him as the only source of power in the universe. Okay, but here the scientists are proving that to be true too. All we did before Pastor brought out this information, we just read about the covenant of salt. And I guess King James decided to put covenant of salt in there, and we just, kind of go with it. And, but when Yahweh, is guiding and directing his great witness into bringing us information, it's imperative that we believe and accept the words of the witness, thereby accepting the reward of that great witness. But Yahweh will further, the Psalms tells us that the unfolding of Yahweh's word, Yahweh's law, brings light. Okay? So it says here that oxytocin is created in the brain whenever someone is near someone who they trust. Social trust and feels great because social alliances promote survival. But misplaced trust does not promote survival. Solid trust bonds take time and effort to build. You can stimulate oxytocin by enjoying the trust you have instead of focusing on the trust you don't have. Okay, so this is actually an attitude that we need to have to go in conjunction with the covenant of salt. We have to trust in Father Yahweh because Yahweh has already bound these things together. Okay, Yahweh has already bound them together. He inspired the great witness to bring us about oxytocin, knowing that the salt is what creates that substance, oxytocin. And oxytocin is released into the body when you are with someone who you trust, when you're around someone who you trust. Okay, and Yahweh says that we should put our trust in Him. So you see how it's all bound up and tied together. Okay, like the tzitzits of your talit, it's bound up and tied together, bringing us closer to Father Yahweh. Okay, these are the things that Yahweh is showing us in these last days, and He's using the scientists to back up His words, which are found in the Scriptures. Okay, the scientists they have to even admit that there is only, they do admit that there is only one source of power. It's just like what the great witness said so many years ago, that there's no such thing as an atheist. Okay, there's just an unbeliever. Because they don't, if you ask an atheist why they don't believe in the Scriptures, they're going to give you a whole bunch of reasons that are just steeped in Christian belief and falsehood. Okay, they're going to tell you, oh, well, why would God not want Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of wisdom? Okay, but here in the house of Yahweh, we fully understand that tree was a tree of the mixture of righteousness and evil. Yahweh didn't want us to partake of evil as well as righteousness. Okay, but if they had that understanding, that would be one thing that they wouldn't be able to hold on to, that the atheists wouldn't be able to hold on to. And you can guarantee, look, we have to really prepare ourselves, because when these people start coming in this direction, we have to, and they ask us for the reason for our faith, Yahweh said it's binding. We got to be able to give them an answer. A clear, concise answer. Okay, not just, what we read the other night, textbook answer. What's the reason for your faith? Well, I love the laws. Well, why do you love the laws? Because the laws give me eternal life, and I'm going to have peace, joy, and abundant living. Right? We have to really be able to go into it and dissect it and show them, okay, this is and Pastor has done it. Pastor has set the ship a sail, and it's up to us to guide and direct, to further flourish in what He has set forth. Okay, He's given us a pattern, and it's up to us to fulfill it, to bring it to completion. Okay, along with Him. Okay, so let's go ahead and pick up on page 124 of the 14th book of Yisrayl. Okay, and we'll pick up here on page 124. And let's go in verse 44. We'll start in verse 44. It says, officials are crediting officials are crediting strong tracking and isolation of people exposed to the virus. Now, this is talking of the Ebola virus. And you'll see later on again that Yahweh verifies His plan. Okay, and He verifies, and Pastor went over all of the things that are mentioned in here. He actually broke it down and showed it in the law concerning the creating of the sweet fragrance to Father Yahweh. That sweet cane was part of it. Okay, so now I'll continue going. It says, how the Ebola kills people is that it dehydrates the body with vomiting and diarrhea. So they were saying that when this occurs, diarrhea and vomiting, you really need to replace this with salt. Okay, you really need to replace this with salt, sugar, or sweet cane, as the scriptures refers to it, and water. Okay, so if you want to take it on a scriptural level, the living waters, the sweet cane for a pleasing aroma to Father Yahweh, and the salt of the covenant. Okay, but these things were saving people from being dehydrated by the Ebola virus. I'll give you a formula here in just a minute of infected patients to counter the effects of vomiting and diarrhea and other symptoms. Nigeria's containment of the Ebola is a spectacular success story, said Ruigama Vaz, the World Health Organization director for Nigeria. Survivor Dr. Abaroa Igono. You gotta say it like that, okay? You can't just like it says the name I pronounced is, and then Pastor, breaks it down. Igono. He said, the treatment is not easy. It entails drinking, and she had it too. At least 5 liters, which is 1.3 gallons of the solution every day for 5 to 6 days. When you have mouth sores or sore throats and feel depressed. So these are the symptoms of the Ebola virus: mouth sores and sore throat, and also feeling depressed. Verse 47, you don't want to drink anything. That is, you don't desire to drink anything. You're not wanting to put anything in your mouth because of the pain and the pain of that comes because of the dehydration. In fact, you feel so bad you just want to lie down and die. You're too weak with sore throats. It's difficult to swallow, but when you have just vomited, you need it. She told the Associated Press, I had to mentally tell myself, you have to drink. You have to drink this fluid, whether it tastes nice or not. Okay? Whether it tastes nice or not. So some 9,000 people have been infected with the Ebola virus, and about 4,500 have died, mostly in the hard-hit Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia, with the number of cases expected to increase exponentially in the coming weeks. Dr. Simon Mardle, one of the world's leading experts on viral hemorrhagic fevers, said the number of deaths could be cut in half if infected people were taught to properly hydrate themselves and do not take, and then Pastor says, do not take anti-inflammatory drugs, which can actually harm Ebola victims. Okay, so the pharmaceuticals that they prescribe for the Ebola virus actually winds up being harmful. But if we would only turn our feet from breaking the Sabbath day, where we would go and learn of the way to bring forth and to maintain our lives, then we would have long life in the land which Yahweh has promised us, which represents the kingdom of Yahweh. Okay, so verse 50, the World Health Organization director Margaret Chain said that an internal World Health Organization report obtained by the Associated Press said the UN agencies bungled efforts to control the outbreak. Okay, so they couldn't even control it because they don't understand, they don't know how, or they don't have the education. But even more than just because, out in the world, their education is formatted and created in order that they would be reliant on the system. Okay, so they're not going to tell you, that you, in order to, regain your health. I remember a few years ago that some of the brothers in, I believe it was in Kenya and Uganda, had started using the ashes, and some of them were sick, and they started using the ash water and drinking it. Okay, of course you have to be careful, but they were drinking it, and there was what some may consider miraculous healings. Okay, but these things are done because of obedience. They understood and they followed the instructions, and Yahweh healed so many of them, and they were so amazed at the healing that came forth from that one practice. But being educated, Pastor says here, this is on page 125 at the top, a little bit down from the top. It says, he's talking about these the little girls. If you remember, they were using a whole bunch of profanity in one of the videos that they had done concerning rape. Okay, and again, this is a perfect example that these girls, they've been educated by this system, but they didn't know any better way to address this topic than to use profanity. Okay, but what Pastor says here is, in a land as big as the United States and supposed to be educated and trying to help people all over the world, why would we here in America have to put up with this? Okay, this is what those girls were saying. Okay, why would we have to put up with this? And that's with the rape. And then they had some others, this is Pastor now, and then they had some others that came behind them and got even worse than these, trying to get attention because rape cases are spreading. Yes, diseases are spreading with rape cases because they could have AIDS or whatever. They don't care. There's no caring in the world today. It's just like 2 Timothy told us, the days will come. They're here. They're here. There's no love. The love is cold. Tonight, if you want to go see it, there's a special event in this great religious town of Abelin, 3 major religious universities. They're going to start cage fighting. Cage fighting. Now, I just read last week where the churches are making a killing off of this because they're bringing cage fighting into the church. And if you remember, we brought the article here one great Sabbath day, and the churches were literally having, gladiators for Jesus, like guys that really wanted to go in there and knock people's teeth down their throat. What, to bring more money into the offering, moon-shaped plates, or what? And so when people go there and they see cage fighting in their churches, do they praise the Lord for allowing them to sit down on a wonderful evening and watch 2 men just totally destroy themselves? And if they could find that example in the scriptures where Yahweh brought, probably somebody who would have made a great wrestler was Barabbas. But I think Barabbas would have made an excellent character. Okay? But one thing you have to understand about Barabbas, though, don't take the depiction that you saw in the Passion of the Christ to be the depiction of what Barabbas was. Okay? because Barabbas was, as the scripture shows, a leader of an insurrection. Okay? He was a leader of an insurrection. This guy wasn't some slouch or some crazy madman as they made it look like in the movie. Remember when they released him and he went through the crowd screaming in people's faces and everything? No, that's not Barabbas. Barabbas was a very smart individual. Had nothing to do with Yahweh. He sought to bring the kingdom by force, okay, or bring what they believed to be peace by force. But in no way go back and read the story of Barabbas, you'll see it. He was a leader of the insurrection. Okay? It says, now I just read this last week where the churches are making a killing off of these cage fights, okay? Let's go down to verse 56. They don't care if the Catholic priests rape little girls or little boys. In fact, let's teach this in our schools, which is exactly what they're doing right now. You know, the Catholic Church even showed that pedophilia can be referred to as a sexual orientation. That's the Supreme Court, taught from Rome, the leaders of the kings of the world. Nigeria's outbreak began in Lagos with a single infected Liberian, and I think someone gave him a formula. I think his name was Hawkins. We have thousands of people in Nigeria right now, thousands of members of Yahweh's group. It says the last thing, this is coming from this article again, the last thing anyone in the world wants to hear is two words, Ebola and Lagos. In the same sentence, the U.S. Consul General, Jeffrey Hawkins, I'm not lying. Jeffrey Hawkins noted at the time saying the development raised the specter of an apocalyptic urban outbreak. Okay, so they were looking for Nigeria to be greatly decimated. And if you know, Lagos, Nigeria is a city. Lagos is a city. And that one city has over 21 million people in it. Okay, so for the Ebola virus to affect Nigeria, and if they didn't know or realize what to do in order to curb the sickness until the body could get through it, that would have been a whole bunch of people just passing on this sickness. Okay, that's 21 million people in one city. Okay, so if you go over, let's go down to verse 64. We drank some of it, and it doesn't taste bad to me. In fact, it tastes great. Just put ice in it, and I put a little vinegar. But I drink salt water every day. Every day. I don't miss a day that I know of. Praise Yahweh. Well, here's a recipe for it, okay? And so he gives us the recipe for the oral hydration solution. Okay, so it's clean water, 1 liter, 5 cupfuls. Now these, Pastor says here, now there's a difference. For those who do not know, there's a cup and then there's a mug. And the mug, of course, is 2 cups. So the smallest one is a cup. Get you a measuring cup. That would even be better. But 5 cups of water, okay, it says 6 level teaspoons of sugar, salt, half a level teaspoon, and 1/2 teaspoon, it says, Pastor says, 1/2 of a teaspoon. Stir the mixture till the sugar dissolves. The homemade solution is adequate in most cases and gets rid of Ebola. If the diarrhea is severe, ask your chemist for a special pack of oral hydration solution. Follow the instructions. Okay, and he has in this on page 126, he has the whole oral rehydration solution outlined in it. Okay, if you'd go over to let's go over to verse 67. Now remember how they turned against salt. Okay, how they turn against salt. Let's see the time of gathering. I don't have time. I'm out of time, but this is a time of gathering right now. And we're entering the time of gathering also, the great Sabbath day. And of course, the main thing you're going to have to remember this and try to abide by it. The main thing that's going to keep you is humbly submitting. Okay? Humbly submitting. That's the main thing that Pastor shows is going to keep us in this way. Because you're going to be judged in this. Yekesha shows that you're going to be judged. If you submit yourself and you humbly submit yourself, as Yahshua said, like a little child, and you obey. Don't do like the priests that Yahweh shows us examples of, who he would give instruction and then they would go the other way and think, well, they had it all figured out. He doesn't ask you to figure it out. He asks you to obey. To obey. Of course, if you do not obey, if you don't obey, he can't use you in his kingdom. So developing this humility, okay, humbling ourselves, will prepare us for a position in Yahweh's great kingdom. Can you imagine Yahweh's kingdom after all these efforts, these 6,000 years to prove what disobedience would bring? Can you imagine him letting someone that doesn't agree, who can, says, how can, Pastor says here, how can two walk together unless they agree? You can't, and he won't allow it. But this is coming. It's very, very close now. We can see from the news with Russia how they're building up opposition for the United States. Not only that, I read several articles this week. I read several articles this week how Russia has submarines in strategic places around the United States and around the Ukraine to counterattack from the U.S. So they're getting ready for war. They're getting ready for war, and we know this. Let's go over to verse 71. It says, but you're going to be on test there too. You know, if you run, Yahweh says you will get killed. And there won't be another opportunity. There won't be another chance. There won't be a second chance. There won't be another life for you, period. May Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the services to the next speaker. I love you. Praise Yahweh. And that brings us to the end of chapter 10, and we'll be picking up on page 128 of chapter 11 for next prep day evening.